Welcome to Home for the Holidays, what to look for when visiting mom and dad. The holidays are all about family, food, and fun, but they're also a great time to check in on mom and dad. In addition to hopefully having a good time together, the questions are, what are the little signs to look for that tell you how your parents really are doing? What do you do if something seems off? And how do you start those conversations without making it awkward for them or for you? I am delighted to be joined by Mark Hensley, a friend of mine and our immediate past chair of our board of directors for ACAP. But Mark also is the Associate State Director for Community Outreach and Advocacy with AARP North Carolina. But before joining the AARP team in 2018, he worked at the local, regional, and state levels in the field of aging across North Carolina. He also was the sole caregiver for both of his parents, who he lost to dementia, and he, at this moment, is the caregiver for his daughter, who just had some surgery. But Mark comes to this conversation with lots of experience, both personally and professionally, about caregiving. So we are delighted to provide some information and hopefully some insight for you. So, Mark, thank you for being here, number one. And number two, why does this conversation matter? And what makes the holidays such a perfect time to be checking in on mom and dad?
Well, Francis, first of all, thanks for having me here. For lots of families, this is the only time that they will see each other in person. You might notice changes that you wouldn't have caught when talking on the phone or even having a Zoom meeting. Things like mobility issues, things like memory lapses, or even signs of loneliness. These visits are a chance to spot problems early and start a conversation before there's a crisis. I often say, before the other shoe drops, and inevitably that other
Right.
shoe will drop. It's about looking at the current situation through the lens of being proactive through love. I love that, looking at reality through the lens of proactive love. That meaning that you love your parents enough that you really want to see what's going on with them. It's not just glossing over or ignoring what is right in front of us right now. Often over the phone, mom or dad will just simply say, "Oh, we're okay." You may find situations that are very different once you're in person. So, all too often, we don't see things until they're a crisis. Really paying attention when getting together in person helps everyone be more prepared for what the future may hold.
And Mark, you probably experienced with your parents, oh, yeah, things are fine over the phone, everything's just clicking along fine and dandy. But you go visit and you see a whole different picture. Okay, so let's talk about the home environment because we walk through the front door and often, after giving everybody the hugs, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see, what does the house look for? So when we walk in, what should we be looking for, Mark?
Well, first, you want to start with any kind of safety hazards, loose rugs, clutter, poor lighting. Remember, a fall is often the very first step toward
Interesting.
losing your independence. The next thing is check the kitchen. Is the food fresh? Are refrigerated items and pantry items in date? This is something I found with my mother. Or is everything just expired and they're still using it? That can tell you a lot about whether they are eating well or struggling with shopping and cooking. Now, in my journey, I noticed my mother had purchased multiple of the same item. There were pounds of sugar in the pantry, lots of cooking spray, lots of vegetable oil, and saving every container that everything came in. So she was beginning to do some hoarding. Green mold, lots of little bits in the refrigerator, clutter and open boxes on kitchen shelves, or sadly, even bugs or rodents. Um, or is there very little in the refrigerator in the cabinets. Mom seems thinner than when you saw her last. You give her a hug and it's all bone. That's something to pay attention to. What about the stairs or the bathroom? Those can be hazards for anyone. What do we need to be on the lookout for? So you're looking for loose railings, or the presence of handrails on stairs that are necessary for safety, or grab bars in the shower.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those stairs and bathrooms can be such hazards for anybody, really at any age, but particularly as people get older, they can be particularly difficult. Um, what about medications? That's always a biggie.
Well, yeah, that is a biggie. A lot of medications look the same. It's easy to get confused. Absolutely, if prescriptions are scattered or they've not been filled, that's a really big red flag. Is there a system in place for taking medicine so you don't forget them? Um, but approach this very gently. Maybe say something like, "Hey, let's make sure you've got everything you need for the next few weeks before I go home." Always keep it supportive, and that's a real hard thing to do as a caregiver or as an adult child of aging parents. Avoid tones of frustration. I have to admit, I didn't always do so well with it, and that leads to caregiver guilt. Or finding that there is a lot of bottles of medication or meds that have just simply not been taken, another red flag. But always, as always, we need to really be aware that not just what we say, but how we say it can convey either love and support or frustration and I simply don't have time for this.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We may think our parents or our loved ones are pretty pretty out of touch, with somebody else's feelings. But the reality is that tone of voice can make a huge difference. We can say the very same thing, but with a different tone of voice, and it comes across very differently. And there's already such sensitivity about, I'm getting older. I mean, very honestly, I'm already experiencing that. But we have the sensitivity about we're getting older and we don't want to be a burden on people and all of that sort of thing. So that tone of voice is so important. But as the caregiver, as the care partner, so difficult sometimes to hold our feelings in check and to think, how would this sound to me? How would I like to hear it this way? So we were talking about a whole lot of stuff really fast. We're going through a lot really fast. I certainly want to talk about health. What signs do we look for? Earlier you were talking about give mom a hug and there's nothing but bones, and
Mm.
I remember that moment. Um, but what signs should we be looking for, and how they move, how they act, how they react to us?
Well, let's all face it, we're all not getting around quite as well as we used to. I got up the other day and, my knees sounded like cornflakes. It's just part of aging. But your parents are at least 20 and sometimes more years ahead of you. So I recommend that you watch for difficulty getting out of a chair, shuffling steps, if their mobility has changed, certainly holding on to furniture and to the wall for balance. So look for those signs of the beginnings of loss of mobility. The second is the cognitive health, and this is again that touchy area.
Huge.
Noticing if they repeat things, and we all do that. But if there's significant repeating of stories, forget familiar names or places, or just seem confused about time, that's something you want to pay attention to. And sometimes there are more subtle clues. Mom says that someone is coming into her house and stealing. Dad got lost from coming back from the barber he's gone to for 25 years. Um, it's not that you lose your keys, it's that you find your keys or you find mom or dad's keys in the freezer, or familiar items like keys, they simply don't know exactly what to do with them.
Right, right. I remember when you're talking about someone coming into the home and stealing. I remember when my mother, she was living in a retirement center at this point, but she absolutely was convinced that someone was coming into her apartment and literally opening her refrigerator door and taking a finger and dipping the finger into her peanut butter and jelly. And
Mhm.
it's those kinds of clues that it's like it's laughable, but it's not laughable. It is a sign that we don't often think means anything significant, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, yeah. Um, so how do you start conversations about some of these difficult topics without it's being awkward for you, the caregiver, the care partner, or for the one you love, the aging person?
So,
That's the
yeah,
question, isn't it?
that is the question. And, this is an individual that's been independent for, let's just say 70 years, maybe longer. And immediately when you start asking those questions, it can feel very threatening to a person's independence. Um, Skip the yes or no questions like, are you okay? What's wrong with you? Instead, try something like, how have you been feeling lately? How's your mobility? Um, are you having any kind of difficulty that I could be helpful with? It's open-ended question and it feels less like an interrogation. So you want to avoid that interrogation, but have more of a conversation where your loved one feels open to express the truth. Focus on your goals and create a calm environment by choosing the right time and place. So think about that. Is um, during my mother loved her stories in the afternoon. That is not the time to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
you can open the conversation by asking a direct, but yet again open ended question like, can we talk about some things that are important to me? Always showing that the importance is the love you have for your parents. Or by expressing a need for help. Prepare by gathering information and thinking about what you want to say. But please remember, friends, to remain flexible, to be patient, to listen actively throughout the discussion. Those open ended questions are so very important. It's trying to remember how we would want to be treated even now. And remember, this may be the beginning of a much deeper conversation. So don't feel frustrated if you don't get very far this time, but start a pattern of having a conversation about the well being of your loved one. And again, focusing on them, their wants, and your concern for them.
Mark, that's a really good point. Is that this just because we don't get the answer that we want at this point, it really is the beginning of a conversation because it is the beginning of a different kind of journey with our parents and one that will be really important to them, but very honestly important to us also. For the rest of both of our lives, it will be. Yeah. Um, Talk some about emotional health also. What should we be looking for? What can we look for relative to how our parents or our loved ones are doing emotionally?
Right, Francis. So we've assessed the physical environment. We've talked about um, the physical body and cognitive um, relationship to that loved one. So now let's talk about their emotions. Basically, are they engaged and are they happy? Remember, we all went through a pandemic and we were all displaced at home for more than a year, for some people, 2 years. And that isolation exacerbated existing health conditions. Are they withdrawn or are they sad? That's something you want to pay attention to. A lot of older people say, I'm lonely. Are they still connecting with friends, or are they becoming isolated? I had an older neighbor who was in her late 80s, and she said, Mark, everybody's passed away. All of my friends are gone, and I don't know what to do. The holidays can highlight that loneliness. And I remember this neighbor bringing her Christmas card list to me and how many names she had marked off because of passing. And especially if they have lost a loved one or a dear friend close to the holidays can be very, very triggering.
Sure, sure, and for so many people, it is, as I call it, the year of firsts. That it's the first holiday season without that loved one. It's the first holiday season that they are very different, and there's a grieving process that we go through when we lose not only someone close to us, but when we lose our ability to do what we typically have been able to do, that we have a grieving process for that also, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember when we were doing some ACAP programs, this was some years ago, and I remember that we were doing multiple programs at the same time. It was a conference, and we were doing multiple programs at the same time. And we had 2 programs going on at the same time. One was about falls and preventing falls, and the other one was about anxiety and depression. And we had put the falls program in the big room because we knew that everybody is interested in falls, and certainly that is a huge issue, as you referenced earlier. But we put the anxiety and depression in this really small room because those were the 2 rooms available, and we thought, "Yeah, there'll be a few people." They brought in chairs. There was standing room only. There were so many people who were really concerned about anxiety and depression in their parents, and how do you do that? How do you work with that? How do you care for someone with those kinds of issues, who are experiencing those kinds of issues? So yeah, this whole thing of holidays in particular can be so poignant and so difficult for people to navigate through, whether it's the year first, the first holiday, or whether this is, this has been 20 years or more. Yeah, very difficult, very difficult. Um, so if dad, if our loved one does seem like, everything we're kind of sensing from conversations and being with them, and even potentially what we are hearing from other people, but certainly what we are getting from them, everything we sense seems to be saying that they are isolated. They are depressed. They are anxious. They are sad. What, and particularly during the holidays, what are some things that we can do to help them without trying to be this, kind of rush in and we're the savior kind of thing? What can we do?
Yeah, Francis, you really hit on something about flying in as the savior.
Mhm.
Your presence there changes the whole routine of your loved one. So, when trying to combat isolation, be that cheerleader for your loved one, suggest simple but joyful activities like let's bake cookies, let's watch a favorite movie, or let's call an old friend. I know that I would take my mother to uh, relatives in a nearby town that she didn't feel like driving to. They were older as well, and it was such a joy for her to see those cousins and them to see her. Sometimes the
Right.
best gift is just your time and attention. Today, we're talking about the holidays, so I wore my holiday festive jacket. You can do the same. Dress happy. Make special events. Make pleasant memories. Suggest that mom or dad dress up for an outing. While you're visiting, you can create positive experiences with which are creating positive memories for mom or dad to hold on after you've gone back home. You know, splurge on a pedicure or a manicure or both, or Take just a quick trip to a gourmet coffee shop. Use your holiday time to break up the normal routine. Do things that are fun. But Francis, certainly, as you said, sometimes the best gift is just our time and our attention. So plan ahead to make that time together very meaningful. Putting down the phone or the tablet and being present. And I know that's something, especially for professionals
Really
that live
hard.
on a mobile device. Remember to put that down. But it can also be important to know the person well enough to know what they would enjoy. So think about that as the parent of, as an adult of an aging parent.
That's a really good point. And when you were talking about that, Mark, I'm thinking about person-centered planning and person-centered care. And if the audience, if you all are not familiar with that term, what it basically means is knowing that person well enough to know, do they like sugar or cream in their coffee or both, and how much? Do they want to have breakfast before watching the news or after? Or do they not want to watch the news at all? Or do they get the news in the morning or the evening? It's those kinds of little details. And how this becomes really important is not just not just for you, but possibly for siblings or other family members that might interact with them, but most especially if there are care professional or paid caregivers coming in, or if your loved one is going um, to an assisted living or particularly a skilled care facility where they will be served and cared for by people who don't know them, who don't have that history. And the more you can hear about who your loved one is, the more you can know about those details so that you can convey that to the people who don't have the history with them, but are going to be caring for them, the better your loved one will be. And quite honestly, the better off the paid caregiver will be for them. So again, the holidays are such a great time to get your parent to tell you their stories. There are so many things that I remember thinking, "Ah, I've heard all my mother's stories. I know every detail." Well, of course, now that she's gone, it's like, shoot, I wish I had asked her about whatever that might have been, that it just didn't occur to me. So even be planful, and I think that's sort of an undercurrent of everything that Mark you've been talking about is be planful about visiting during the holidays. Try to be aware of some things that you can do with them, both in terms of activities like the manicure, pedicure, coffee, the visiting somebody, but also the kinds of things that are just, "Tell me your story. Tell me who you are, and how was it when you were a child? How was it when you were my age?" Those kinds of things are so important. We all love to tell our stories and to be heard telling our stories, and it may be that you even record their voice and record them telling these stories. It may be that you sit and look at old photo albums, and get them to tell you, who are these people? Because I don't know for you all, but for me, oh my heavens, I have tons of pictures and I am clueless as to who they are or what the circumstances were. So lots and lots that can be done during the time that you are there, but you're absolutely correct, and I am such a fiend for my phone or my iPad, but this is the time to put those aside for a little while and just truly be present for your loved one. Um, and yeah, I love your statement that the best gift that we can give truly is the gift of time, time with our loved one. So, okay, so we've talked about a whole lot of stuff, and somebody goes home and they realize there are some changes. There are some differences between when I saw my mom or my dad last. What's the next step, Mark? What what can people do?
Yeah, so while you're still there, you need to be thinking about when you're going to be at home. But while you're still there, start small, offer help with technology, for example. This is sometimes for myself a real barrier, but is the TV working the way they want it to? Do they have, is their internet working? Other technology in the house? Are they having any issues? I think it's just really interesting. I purchased some items here recently, and everything now comes with a remote, and that's just more. And you can't turn it on unless you have the remote. Well, what if you lose the remote? Then you got to throw it away. But also, if timing feels right, gently ask about the future plans. See where mom and or dad or both of them are thinking about the future. And I want you to most of all remember you're not alone on your journey. There are great resources like local aging services, that whether that be the senior center, council on aging, or other um, older adult focused agency. There's also now caregiver support groups, and a lot of children don't consider themselves a caregiver. But as you gently begin to look at the situation that your parents are in, that puts you in the role of often a long distance caregiver. So think about those support groups to know that you're um, not alone. A lot of these support groups are online. One of the largest support groups in the country is ran by AARP, but there are also many, many other resources like ACAPcommunity. That's ACAP. You can see it above France's right shoulder. That ACAP is a resource online with podcasts, with links to many resources, as well as AARP. And you don't have to do this alone. That's the thing you should remember. Um, and, in addition to our concern for our parents and their well being, there can be lots of different emotions that run around in our heads when it comes to people we love, the fear of losing them, the fear of not doing it right. How is their decline going to impact you? That's a scary thing. Are you going to be able to continue working when things are much, much different? Or is there a future move for them? And a lot of us just go, oh, I don't want to think about that. And I'm famously quoted for saying, hope is not a plan. So remember that. We hope and pray everything's going to be okay, but hope is not a plan. So the first thing you need to think about before you start a plan is, what are the things that are important to me and my parents? Um, and there's lots of tips that we could go on all day and really get into the details. Today was a opportunity to open the door to this conversation, to have you look at the holidays as an opportunity to check in the situation. And the next steps that would come about often are about talking about legal documents, consulting an elder law attorney, making sure that your parents' assets are protected, but that's an entirely different webinar. Today is about what to look for once you go home on the holidays.
Right, exactly. That's what we wanted just to focus on is that there are so many different pieces of all of this. But what we wanted to do today was just to begin the conversation and to say, people want to know when I go home for the holidays, what do I need to be looking for and be on the lookout for? There are tons of resources and supports out there for you as the care partner or the caregiver. Not it used to be that all of the focus was on the older adult. And the last 10 or 15 years, there still is a lot of support and a lot of focus on the older adult. We who are baby boomers are getting older. Um, but but there also now is a whole lot more support for you as the caregiver. So feel free, please do take a look at that. And yes, ACAP has lots online in addition to our local chapters. AARP certainly has tons of stuff online, tons of support. or caregivers online. Um, yeah, I would I certainly hope that you are in all your spare time that you're taking a look at, and just by simple Google, there's lots of information out there that can be helpful. I want to put a plug in, Mark. You said you named like Council on Aging and some specific local entities. I all my go-to is always the Area Agency on Aging. So I'm going to put a plug in for them. Area Agency on Aging covers or supports every single community in our entire nation. So
Mhm.
whether your parent or your loved one is right there in your community or in a different state or across the country, you can be in touch with the Area Agency on Aging, or sometimes referred to as AAA. Uh, um, but you can be in touch with them and find out what are the resources in the community where your parent is, and also what are the supports for you as a caregiver in your community. They can help with all of that. I have found AAAs to be absolutely amazing. They typically have a person on their staff whose title is something along the lines of the family caregiver support specialist. And those are the people that, I mean, I have our local one on my speed dial that I know exactly how to get in touch with Mary, because so often there will be questions that, as well connected as I am in my area relative to the aging services, there are things change, people change, services change, and Mary stays up on that. So I highly recommend that you get to know your area agency on aging folks. As a quick recap, then, what we've talked about, Mark, is look for changes in the house, look for changes in your loved one's health, and that's physical and emotional, or mental, cognitive. Look for any kind of change in their mood. Second, keep it caring, not critical, not frustrating. Keep thinking in terms of how would I want to be treated? That's the key. Hard at times, absolutely it is, but worth it, absolutely it is. Start small, and goodness knows, use the resources. There are tons of resources out there, both both in the community, local in the community, as well as national or international, both in person as well as online. So look for the resources and use those resources. We've covered a whole lot of territory, Mark. Do you have any final last words?
Yeah, Francis, just three really quick things. First of all, just remember checking in isn't about taking over. So remember that. It's about making sure that your loved ones can be that independent person living in their home for as long as possible. That's the goal. Number two, we've talked about a lot of resources. And so your homework is if you're in a caregiving situation, check with HR and find out what resources they have available, which could include leave, it could include special conditions for you as an employee if you're in a caregiving role. So check into that. And then the third thing is, like I said, we always hope and pray everything's going to be okay, but hope is not a plan. So begin making that plan, thinking about the future, just like you would for how you plan for your kids to go away to school, to live on their own. Now it's another chapter in life that you need to pay attention to with your parents.
You're saying that, Mark, and I thank you for that. Um, but you're saying that reminds me that it's sort of like this is one of those stages of life. Being the caregiver for a parent is one of those stages of life, and I hear people say all the time, I remember when we were in high school or college that the conversation was about what classes are you taking, and who are you dating? And then the conversation became, who are you planning to marry?
Mhm.
And what kind of job do what's your major, and what job are you going into, or what field are you going into? And then it became all about weddings, and then children, and all that surrounds all of that. And it's just the next part of that journey, part of our journey, as well as our parents' journey. The next part of that is, now we are having conversations with friends and colleagues about, well, my mother did this, or did your dad ever experience that? I remember when I was working, when my mother had moved near me, and I had one person who was also dealing with a mother who was aging and declining. And we every morning, we would start with what we called our mommy report, and that it was literally 3 to 5 minutes just kinda checking in, but somebody having at least one person who really gets it is enormously helpful for both people. So I hope each of you has at least one person that you can turn to, that you can truly say, "This is what's going on." You can be heard, and they can be heard by you. One of the things I also wanna say, often we hear something about, "I've become my parent's parent. I now am parenting my parent." Ugh, we never parent our parent. Our parent will always be our parent. Certainly, sometimes the activities are going to change. Our our way of caring for them and caring about them may change, but we never switch places. We simply are continuing to journey. And what was your statement at the very beginning? Something about being, I'm not going to be able to find it, but something about being intentional in love, or caring in love,
Yes,
listening in love.
yes.
I think that's such a great summation of what we really are trying to say through all of this. We are delighted to have this opportunity to be with you all, and I certainly hope that this conversation has been meaningful for you, that you are taking away some nuggets that you can use, and that are truly going to be helpful for you as you visit your parents and your loved ones, your older loved ones, this holiday season. We wish you the very best holiday season, and wish you a holiday full of warmth and laughter and definitely love.